Good evening to those in India, and good morning to those joining from the United States. My name is Scott Ticknor. I'm the Deputy Principal Officer at the U.S. Consulate General in Mumbai. Welcome to today's discussion, What to Expect at COP26, a Framework for Indian Businesses. Today's discussion couldn't be more timely given the 2021 UN Climate Change Conference, also known as COP26, begins in less than a week. And I can't imagine better partners than the Atlantic Council and CII with which to host this discussion. COP26 in Glasgow is a pivotal moment in the start of this decisive decade to tackle the climate change crisis. The climate change crisis is already here. This is not a challenge for future generations. We must confront it today. Tackling the climate crisis is imperative. It also can be the greatest economic opportunity of our time. We can and we will create good paying jobs and new growth industries as we address the climate crisis. Each COP is critical because it serves as a moment in which the attention of leaders around the globe is centered on the biggest threat facing mankind today. The United States fully understands the scale of the crisis and the importance of multilateral coordination to address it, which is why President Biden, Secretary Blinken, Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, and more than 10 cabinet secretaries and senior administration officials will travel to Glasgow to convey our whole of government approach to tackling the crisis, the climate crisis. From the first day of his administration, President Biden has taken decisive domestic action and provided global leadership on climate change. This has included signing the instrument on day one to return to the Paris Agreement, setting bold domestic goals, including achieving a carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035, 80% by 2030, and net zero greenhouse gas, or GHG, emission economy-wide by no later than 2050. Uniting automakers and auto workers around a target to make half of all US vehicles sold in 2030 zero emissions vehicles. And pledging to work with Congress to quadruple US international climate finance to help achieve the collective $100 billion finance mobilization goal to support developing countries. India also deserves recognition for its global leadership to take action and address the climate crisis. On his most recent visit to India, Special Envoy Kerry praised India for being, quote, a world leader in demonstrating that economic development and clean energy can go hand in hand. Noting that India has already achieved roughly 100 gigawatts of its goal to generate 400 gigawatts of renewable energy. Prime Minister Modi's initiative to establish the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure further demonstrates India's leadership on climate issues. But of course, the world cannot rely on government action alone. The nature of the crisis we are in today requires the speed and scale that the private sector brings to the table. Public-private partnerships will be key to successfully transition our global economy into a new era of sustainability. This is why I'm so thrilled to see all of you joining today's session. Dr. Irfan Nuruddin, the Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's South Asia Center and a professor of the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, will lead the discussion. Dr. Nuruddin conducts research on the political economy of development, trade, and investment, and the challenges of democratization in the 21st century. You can refer to his full bio and email invite to today's event. Once again, thank you all for joining. I look forward to seeing you at our post-COP26 event on November 30th to discuss the opportunities for US-India collaboration on mitigating the effects of climate change and building greater sustainability. Thank you again, and over to you, Dr. Nuruddin.
Thank you, Mr. Ticknor. Really appreciate you and your colleagues and the leadership of the US Consulate in Bombay for sponsoring this event. I'm very grateful to our partners at the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, without whose help this would not be possible, And just want to acknowledge before we get started, your colleagues, Ms. Amrita De Mello in particular, for her hard work, and my colleague, Ms. Anya Bharadwaj, for all her support to bring this event to fruition. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists, I want to just put some context over here. What's happening and what will happen in Glasgow is in some ways a last moment of changing the inflection point, changing the direction of the climate crisis. It is hard to overstate the existential crisis that the world as we understand it and know it faces right now. If the collective action problem that is the climate crisis cannot be addressed head on. The time is now for radical changes in how we live our lives if we are going to avert the worst of the climate crisis. And we already see in India, in the United States, all around the world, the rapidly changing weather and climate that is causing havoc for large parts of the world and for millions and millions of people. Poor people in particular bear a disproportionate burden from climate change, extending from the quality of the air they breathe to the quality of the water they drink, to the actual places that they live, coastal erosion, flooding, mudslides, and landslides. What is unique about the US and India in their approach to the climate crisis is at the end of the day that these are market-driven societies in which business plays a central role in shaping the lives of the millions upon hundreds of millions of citizens. Unlike other parts of the world in which government plays a much more dramatic role in shaping the outcomes of the future, in India and the United States, it is businesses, it is industry that will take the lead in working with their governments to achieve a better future for all of us. So it is in that context that we are excited today to focus really on the opportunities for Indian businesses coming out of COP26. To facilitate that conversation, I'm very honored to introduce to you three of our panelists. As I name them, they will turn their videos on and we will then embark on a conversation. In alphabetical order, Mr. Prabodh Acharya is the Chief Sustainability Officer for the JSW Group, a global conglomerate based and headquartered in India. Ms. Lou Del Bello is a freelance journalist based in Delhi who has been writing on the climate and energy crisis for years. And Mr. Vivek Pathak is the head of climate finance at the International Finance Corporation. He is currently based in Washington, DC, from where he joins us today. Greetings, all of you. In the chat, for those of you in attendance, I have put links to the Atlantic Council South Asia Center, which I represent here today, and also CII. You obviously already know the US consulate in Bombay. I'm also adding a few other links in the chat as the morning wears on that you can follow at your convenience. This includes coverage of the energy and environmental issues that are occurring at the South Asia Center and at the Atlantic Council. I also urge you to follow Ms. Del Bello's newsletter, Lights On, the link of which I've already posted in the chat. Without further ado, welcome colleagues, and thank you so much for being here. Lou, I want to start with you if I may. You are a journalist who's been covering these issues for years. This is the biggest news story in climate right now. What are you tracking? What are you watching? What should we be looking for to know whether this is going to be good news or whether it's a tremendous missed opportunity? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So hello, everyone. It's great to be here. And yes, I share the excitement for this COP that is just a week away. I hope my audio is okay. I'll try to speak quite loudly. I think this COP is going to be unusual because it's a very, very important moment in the history of the climate negotiations, but we don't expect a specific deliverable like in Paris, where we had a single agreement to be realized. So I think one thing that as a journalist and observer, I would focus on is the type of narrative that will come out of this COP. And a type of narrative that will focus on increased ambition, that so far has been in terms of NDCs, so each of the pledges that the countries will put forward, or in terms of climate finance, that has been too often simplified in terms of how much money developing countries are willing to disperse towards the developing world. And why this is an important dimension, I think it's really crucial to understand how this money will be spent. And the participation of businesses would really complete the dimension of increased ambition. So there is no success, even if developing countries are able to fork out so much money to cover, a good slice of the needs, of the climate needs of various countries, which is absolutely impossible at the moment. Success will not be achieved without the participation of the private sector that will be able to scale up these efforts on the ground. So I was particularly excited to see, for example, the participation of the International Solar Alliance that has just put out an ambitious package of measures, including an aspirational goal of $1 trillion by 2030, if I'm not mistaken, and a de-risking facility that will be focused on Africa initially, but will have really the goal to make emerging markets that have a lot of renewable potential more attractive to businesses and a better investment for businesses across the world. So I think these are really interesting signs, really interesting propositions, and it would be really good for Indian businesses as well, because India is obviously the country where the biggest solar focus lies at the moment. I think another aspect I will be focusing on, and I think will be very interesting from business perspective, and also, as a hopeful citizen, I think will be very important, is to see how new technologies are taking shape and people are really starting to believe that they can play a part in the energy transition. So if we think about the hydrogen mission that India is promoting, and more businesses are really trying to tap into this opportunity with a realistic perspective. It's not going to be solving the energy transition on its own, but hydrogen technology can really tap into those key areas that are difficult to decarbonize elsewhere. So I think really innovation and digging deeper into what climate finance means will be the key to success to these negotiations.
That's a great overview, Lou. Thank you for setting the table. Vivek, if I may turn to you, and Lou provided such a perfect segue in focusing on climate finance. What's interesting about the lead up has been a very clear statement by India and other developing countries that while they share the goals of the world, they really want to force the developed world to answer the question of whether they're going to honor their commitments to provide the financing that poorer countries require to make this transition. At the IFC and in your current role, you are at the helm of a major part of the climate finance agenda. What are you seeing from there, and what are you looking for at COP that will shape the next year and further?
Thanks so much, Irfan. And I think Lou provided the perfect segue, as you said. So I think, what do we hope for from COP? I would just break it down into a couple of things. So one is a lot more ambitious NDCs. The NDCs that we have today, the latest report one read, will lead us to, I think, well over 2 degrees. Yeah. So we really need more ambitious NDCs. So that's one. The second is what we really need is, and this is not a philanthropic dinner where people are coming to put pledges. I really want to, that's what some people think, will happen. I don't think it'll happen. But we keep hearing about these trillions of dollars which large financial institutions are managing globally, and that they're just waiting to get into climate. So I'm hoping that they can get in. We are at the forefront in emerging markets. We operate in probably the most challenging environments around the world. That is where capital is needed. And I think these trillions of dollars which are waiting on the sideline, I'm hoping that we can come up with platforms, which is what we at IFC are working on, where we can channel at least part of this into emerging markets. Now, you need to de-risk it, but at the same time, you need a slightly different risk appetite. So that's the second thing, is that I hope the commercial lenders and investors, institutional investors, are willing to really step up and say, we are willing to take a little more risk, or the perception of risk at least. Yeah. The third is that we really hope that we can have a meeting of minds. I think that's most important, because there is no point in continuing to say, well, if you give me this, I'll do this, and then the developed countries say, yes, we are on our way, et cetera, et cetera. I think that would be the best outcome, that there's a meeting of minds and agreement that this is what it's going to take for us to get to the ultimate goal of 1.5 degrees here. Now, what we are seeing a lot of at IFC and the World Bank Group in general is we've just come out with a climate change action plan, which is very ambitious. We plan to do 35% of our business dedicated to climate for our own account, which is what we do directly. Which, if you look at it in the context of the fact that we are a developmental institution, we have many goals, and climate is clearly one of them. It's quite ambitious. 5 years ago, we were less than 25%, so a significant step up. We've also agreed that in a few years, all our operations across the bank group will be Paris aligned, so which is again a big sort of step. And what this will do, we hope, is as there is a lot more what I call green capital waiting, we will be working with our clients and our countries to try and green operations across the firms, across the financial sector. And with that, we're hoping we'll be able to catalyze and mobilize more capital. And I'll just put in a plug for the work that we've done in India. And I recall when we did our first solar 2 megawatt deal in India, I was head of risk and I was very concerned because tariffs were high. It was a new sector. This is 15 years ago. Azure Power, I'll tell you all the name. But we went into it. We've lost a bit of money across the world in solar, but we went in, we did it. And as we all know, Azure is a success story listed on the NASDAQ. CDPQ bought them out. But that is an example of what we need a lot more of, is the MDBs, concessional capital, de-risking capital coming in. But the government has to play ball of, tango as well, because we need reforms, and without reforms, things are not going to happen. So that's what we need from governments. And today, I would like to argue that the bank group has played a reasonable role in making India the 4th or the 5th largest solar market in the world. We finance Reva, the single largest solar farm, 750 megawatts, and there's a new one we're going to announce soon. So I think that's what we need, is a combination of reforms, increased risk appetite, we need de-risking capital, and then we, MDBs and people like IFC, we will be there to put together the whole package and be in the forefront to make it happen.
Thank you for the leadership you've already shown, Vivek, and for getting this conversation going. So if I may turn then to you, Prabodh, you sit in this panel in a very unique perspective as the Chief Sustainability Officer of a global conglomerate headquartered and born in India, as it were. From your perspective, as the person who's worked in this field for so many years, but also in your current role, what are you most excited about in the agenda in Glasgow, and what are you going to be paying attention to most?
First of all, thank you, Irfan, for that question, and hello to all my audiences. Let me give my perspective first before I play the hat of CSO. All we know, climate change is arguably currently the biggest business risk, but what we see is one of the biggest commercial opportunity or business opportunity at all times. So businesses seeking to manage this risk should seize this opportunity to protect and to create value from sustainability, and they should pay a close attention to COP26. Any business that strives on its customers, so therefore COP26 may drive this customer behavior, which in turn will impact the business revenues. And the business are already differentiating themselves by using carbon footprint levels and communicating their environmental impact of the products. And this trend is likely to be accelerated post COP26. So therefore, I see here is opportunity for business to communicate their sustainability positions well. So what it will mean, I completely agree with what she stated, that this means more innovation and new business models. And the combination of emerging technology and increasing price of carbon emissions will definitely create new opportunity for business. We could see that. I could give example how we are seeing that in JSW. but we all see in the sectors of electric vehicles, green hydrogen, how it is coming, energy transitions. These are significant opportunity, and there we from we being majorly steel producers, I see a lot of business opportunity there for the steel industries. So this opportunity may involve the creation of new products and services, and even entirely new business models. For the innovations to happen, and as you rightly stated from the beginning, that India and the US mostly, the private sector drives innovations and the business and influences decarbonizations, the green financial market will get a boost. And if I quote the Bloomberg's New Energy Foundation, which has calculated around 78 trillion to 130 trillion of new investment is needed by 2050, and that's huge. And that in areas such as power generation and hydrogen production to enable the world to meet the environmental targets what we are trying to set. So therefore, COP26 is an opportunity for governments to provide business with both greater certainty and details on their commitment towards decarbonizations, be it net zero by any year, so that as a business we look forward to, so that we get a certainty in the direction. And specifically countries in the global south, which do not have access to the level of capital that would allow them to carry out investment programs at the same scale. Governments and business in developing countries are hoping on those 100 billion annual climate development finance, which was agreed in the COP15 in the Paris Agreement. But without much harping on that fund, I would see that because there is an opportunity for business, so therefore business and private entrepreneurs will focus on developing new business models, products and services that will cater to a new era. So coming to my role as a CSO for a global Indian conglomerate, as you stated, my job is to assist my leadership to formulate strategy and fine-tune business model to address the sustainable opportunities and challenge, which in today's context is basically the climate change is the main context, which means personally, I see COP26 as an opportunity to move from words to actions. And in context, it would mean for government to provide business with greater certainty and a detail in their commitment towards decarbonization and net zero. I believe it is an opportunity for many different industry-specific working groups at the conference, which will formulating decarbonization strategy. For example, we talk about Net Zero Steel Initiative or Steel Climate Aligned Finance Working Group working the decarbonization pathway. So these kind of things I will be watching very closely, besides the technology transfer innovations and of course the climate financing. So this is going to be a platform for companies to come forward and talk about their achievement in sectors, their leadership in the sector, like I can talk about green steel, green cement, or energy transitions, green hydrogen, the plans, how it can change the way we are looking at energy scenario, and the pathways that we could provide for the decarbonization pathway and creating business opportunity, win for all. Here I'll stop. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Congratulations on all the initiatives that you've been spearheading. Let me stay with you for 1 second. The one thing you did not mention, sir, is essentially what we might call a collective action problem. A lot of people are referring to the global climate crisis as the ultimate collective action problem, because as much as a single country can do, if other countries don't also do their bit, the world still warms up, etc. From a business perspective, there's a different kind of collective action problem, which is that if you choose to take certain actions, but your competitors don't, they might have an advantage in the business sector, which is might be problematic. Do you perceive it as such, or do you actually see good practices in terms of the climate, in terms of energy, as actually also being good business?
Okay, I suppose the question is to me.
Yes, sir. If I could start with you first.
I see otherwise. Taking a leadership in decarbonization or taking sustainability into business strategy is actually good for business. Look, if industry like ours, the steel sector, which is hard to abate, or cement sector, which is hard to abate, or energy, thermal energy, depending on, entirely thermal energy. When you look for decarbonizing, you look at the strategies not only in changing the technologies, but also how you can improve your current efficiencies. Take the example of bringing in energy efficiency or material efficiency or process efficiency. It actually adds to your bottom line. It improves your business performance. So therefore, I do not see decarbonization is always a cost to the business, rather it is an investment to the business. Second thing, when you invest in innovation and new technology, you look ahead. So you are ahead of the competitor. And although in this part of the world, when you differentiate between the two products, not necessarily environmental impact or the product sustainability brings additional revenues, but definitely differentiate yourself from the competitor. So personally, I do not see this as a challenge or it's a burden or it is a cost. I look this as more as investment, opportunity to improve your business perspective and be in the leadership positions. And if you look at if you look at any sector leaders, they have done differently than the competitor. That's why they are leaders. So I like my business to be in the leadership position than following somebody.
That's a very bold answer. I appreciate that. Luke, if I can come to you next. Obviously, for Mr. Acharya to give the visionary answer he just did is one thing from a perspective of a massive company with a lot of opportunities. When you think about the opportunities or challenges for medium, small enterprises in India, do you think that they see this in the same way, or do you think that they see this more in a zero-sum kind of perspective as they try and grow a foothold in a very competitive market? What advice would you give to those smaller businesses in terms of seeing this as an opportunity as well? Lou?
Gave me a tough question.
I did. That's the point.
I think with small businesses, I've been living in different countries, and I lived in India for 3.5 years, and I'm always interested to hear, like in my work as well, the perspective of medium and small businesses, because at the end of the day, these are those that support the economy. And I think probably in this case, it's really crucial to have a change in culture and show that if you adopt sustainability measures and if you take advantage of what's there for you in terms of finance that has to be there, finance instruments that are targeted at small and medium enterprises. If you take advantage of that, eventually will pay off for you. And I think it's really a matter of culture in both in how you run your business and how you make personal choices as a citizen. For example, in India, things like cooling, we have a lot of conversation on how to improve cooling efficiency. And this is a problem that India will increasingly face. So I think the same principle applies to small businesses. Obviously, it's not easy because if you have to work on a tight budget month by month, you're unlikely to be willing to invest extra for an uncertain return. So for me, it's really important that the financial world really steps in and facilitates this transition. And it doesn't have to be necessarily just in the form of grants or huge amounts of money, but strategically placed incentives. And India is doing really, really well on this already. It's done it in solar, it's doing it in like manufacturing incentives, and lots of companies are already taking this up. For now, it's only big companies, but it could be smaller companies in the medium term.
Well, you answered a tough question extremely well, as expected. Vivek, that last point actually echoes the question that came in from Mr. Kishore Kavadia over the Q&A. The distinction between loans and grants in the climate finance mix. How is the IFC approaching this? Is there a differentiated portfolio as we think about supporting smaller businesses? Are you seeing the innovation in climate finance products, not just from IFC, but from the private sector as well, that you think we'll need? What's on the horizon in that regard?
So, Irfan, let me just also pick up on the question you asked, Lou, if you don't mind, because
Yes, of
I
course.
think that's
Please.
absolutely critical, because if we don't succeed in greening the SMEs and the smaller firms, we are leaving out 50–60% of the economy. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge. You know, large firms like Mr. Acharya's firm have access to technology and capital to make it happen. The smaller firms don't. They don't understand it. They don't have access to capital or technology. And I think that's something that we at the IFC are working on, is what I've described as how do you green the domestic financial sector. So that's going to involve policies. That's going to involve, de-risking capital. But you really need to get the local banks and the local microfinance firms to take this to heart. But the positive side is that as the larger firms start to green their operations, they will want their vendors and their suppliers to also green their operations, which is where I think the opportunity lies, is, that whole trickle down effect, which I hope will be not a trickle down effect that will move much faster, but that's probably the biggest challenge that we have today. So on loans versus grants, I would like to say that we need to look at the entire spectrum, right from loans to de-risking capital to grants. And I think each one of them has a different role to play. And I think the big opportunity that I see really is, as you try and decarbonize manufacturing, some of these technologies that we're seeing today are expensive. And again, I'll go back to the analogy I made earlier in solar. When solar was first being mainstream, it was 26 to 28 cents. Today in India, I think we've got tariffs at below 2 cents. And even in some of the most challenging parts of Africa, we've come down to well below 5. So this happened because you had a new generation or 2–3 new generations of solar panels where efficiencies went up. This happened because early stage we managed to access de-risking capital. Some of it was not really grants necessarily, but sort of sometimes it could be like a first loss, which you can call it a grant. Sometimes it's just cheaper capital, which brings the prices down. And you have to then blend all this together and provide a package. I am personally not a big fan, and this is personal, of just providing grants unless there's a very, very clear objective. Because as you say, don't give people fish, teach them how to fish instead. So I think that's what we really need, is you need the whole suite of financial products. And we are hoping that with this suite of financial products, we will be able to mainstream technologies, which today are either very early stage and therefore high risk, sort of venture capital kind, I would say. But there are technologies out there which can decarbonize steel and cement, but they're expensive. And until and unless they're out there at scale, they're going to remain expensive. So we need a pool of capital which will bring the prices of these technologies down. I think that's one way to look at it. For the newer technologies, there's some very exciting things happening around the world, in California, in China, in Israel, in India, on new technologies that are being developed. Green hydrogen is one example. A lot of work going on all over the world in green hydrogen, but it's very expensive today. So how are you going to bring the price of that down? That's where you need what I would call de-risking capital there.
That's a great question. Vivek, let me just stay with you for a second on this technology perspective, right? I mean, we are in a world in which what we're able to do because of technological advances is quite staggering, the pace of it, right? I mean, so what we'll have in terms of access to technology in 5 years, I'm guessing I can't even begin to imagine, right? In 10 years, even more so. And yet the terms of technology transfer remain asymmetric, especially for receiving countries that are not the technology producers. So there are going to be a whole bunch of companies in Silicon Valley and maybe in Shanghai that will get fabulously wealthy because they develop technologies, but the countries that have to purchase them wonder whether or not that technology will be transferred fairly. Mr. Ashok Chowgule sent us a question over email asking exactly on this front. Is this a reason for concern? Do we have to worry about whether the innovation and R&D that goes into technology development on climate will make it hard for these countries to see, for these companies to see an incentive to then share that technology worldwide? Do we have multilateral institutions playing a role in facilitating technology transfer? What would you tell our audience on this front?
So firstly, I'm not sure I necessarily agree that technology transfer is not going to happen. I mean, there are, historically it took tens of years for technology transfer to happen. But if you look at the last decade or so, let's just look at telecom and IT, how fast that has just proliferated throughout the world. You know, whether it's a small country in the South Pacific or in Africa or a large country like India, I don't think there's been a delay in rollout of 5G. I mean, costs are there, and obviously that's what I said, that's what we need de-risking capital for. I also think that at the end of the day, technology providers will want scale. Because at the end of the day, there's no point if I use my technology for myself, but that's still expensive. That's the point I keep trying to make. So I think technology providers will want global operations. And if you look at large firms, most of them have global operations today. And I think that's the way it's going to play out. Now, what is our role in that is precisely, we are working with some very interesting, a fund here, which was founded by the Gates Foundation called Breakthrough Energy, which is doing exactly this. And what we would love to do with these kind of firms and funds is to take the technologies in which they're investing in developed countries and help them mainstream them into emerging markets. What is very clear when I talk to people, either in the Silicon Valley or on the East Coast, is manufacturing is out there in Asia. So that's where ultimately, that is the big market there. And I think that's where everyone wants to ultimately go and sell these technologies. Now, I'm pretty sure there will be firms that will not be willing to share the technologies, little anyone can do about it. But I take a lot of sort of, positive intent, the way telecoms and digital have been mainstreamed across the world, where they were democratized at a pace we've never seen before. And I'm hoping the same will happen in manufacturing as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. So, Prabodh, if I can come back to you, this question about small and medium enterprises plays a particular role also in the work of the JSW Group, I imagine, because you have your own supply chains that fuel your company. If I may ask, you've talked a lot about sort of the vision that you are laying out in the strategy on sustainability. Could you paint for our audience some of the lessons you've learned as you've incorporated this into day-to-day operations work? How do you bring along your many, many suppliers across the entire conglomerate to accept the vision that is coming out of your office, that's coming out of your leadership? For instance, what support do you provide those in your supply chain so that they too can make this green transition that you are committed to?
Thank you, Irfan. I think it is the easier part is to drive your strategy into your own operations, because that is where you have more control. When you come to the supply chain, and you rightly stated, when your supply chain varies from large supplier to small, medium suppliers, it really becomes a challenge. So let me answer that in two parts. Where when it is an upstream side of supply chain, that is my raw material suppliers, those are normally the large players. So there it is relatively easier for us to drive, because we shared a common vision. We try to agree on sharing a common vision, so both work together in the space of decarbonizations. If I may, without naming, the raw material supplier, we get a lot of iron ore, a lot of coking coal from outside. So mostly the material supplier, there it becomes easier when we upfront agree on a common vision and we agree on the project, we agree on things what we need to do. But when it comes to small and medium sector, so we are trying to put right now is a supplier code of conduct that we need to follow together. That is feasible from both the side. And I must agree that we are in an early stage in deploying that. So it's required more of handholding, more of working together, more of seeing that, look, there is also a business opportunity. And I'm sure it is going to be more and more once we start new business sites. For example, if we are working on green hydrogen, is coming as a big way, where we are also focusing both in the generation side from our energy business and the usage side from our steel and cement business perspective. There we can see that a lot of opportunities there for the MSME sector also there. But those are going to happen as you stated. Right now, it is more awareness building and building the capacity and capability stage.
Thank you for that very honest answer. I appreciate that. Since you did mention your cement metal mining sector, it's such a large part of your company's success. It is also, of course, probably the single biggest challenge from the perspective of the sustainability, climate-friendly policies that you are committed to. Would it be possible for you to give us some concrete initiatives that you're doing? What does decarbonization in the context of mining look like? There's a lot of debate right now about whether the petrochemical countries around the world are going to be able to deliver on what we need them to deliver. There was a pretty important announcement in Riyadh made just last week on Saudi Arabia's commitment on this front. What does this look like from the perspective of a large company that has such a large investment in mining, in steel, in carbon intensive products?
Yeah, I think, Irfan, let me answer. You rightly pointed out, because we will be in the spotlight because we are operating in the steel, cement, and also in energy generation mostly. And those are carbon intensive and also called hard to abate because it is not easy. If I start with the example of our energy business, which is currently having almost 70% coming from the thermal energy. So our objective is to become carbon neutral by 2050. So we want to reduce our emissions almost 70% by 2030. So we have very concrete plan is to move to renewable. So we will not be in thermal energy generation. So that is an easier part of our business to decarbonize. Our decarbonization pathway looks very clear because it gives good business benefit by converting from thermal to renewables, including green hydrogen. So that's a clear-cut path. Now coming to two sectors which talk about steel and cement, which are very difficult to decarbonize. We have set our target first for 2030, what we want to achieve in this decade. Because in this decade, we are not seeing new, innovative, disruptive technologies going to come, whether it is hydrogen reductions or large CCUS project to capture all the carbon which we are emitting and put to use. So that's not going to happen quickly. So what's going to happen is, for sure, we know we can reduce our emission intensity. So we have given a commitment to reduce 42% from our steel operations. That is mostly focusing on that we will be using more renewable energies, a complete renewable energy. That means we will not have any thermal exposure, thermal energy, electrical energy exposure. Let me clarify, because coking coal is still needed for reductions of iron ore to making iron. But here we will focus on efficiency improvements and using more and more less carbon intensive reductant in the blast furnaces, and increase more and more scrappage availability. So we have a clear pathway which we are committed publicly. And that is how we could raise sustainability linked bond from the market, which was a good success. Now coming to the cement, I think in the cement sector, we particularly in advantage positions. The reason because our business was created to support circularity in the industry, and that was created to manage the waste coming from steel making process. Is some waste is called slag, which comes from the iron making process and steel making processes, and we use that for the cement making process. And that's the reason JSW Cement currently has the lowest carbon footprint in the world among the cement industries. And we'll like to remain so. Single strategy is that we'll focus only on using the industrial waste in the process and keep on making cement, with the ultimate objective that at the concrete level, we become carbon neutral by 2050.
Thank you for that, again, very forthright answer. Lou, if I can come to you, we've spoken a lot about business right now. I want to move out, zoom out a little bit to the geopolitics of this. This is a conversation happening thanks to the partnership with the US consulate. It's happening with the US consulate in Mumbai, in India. So let's talk about America and about India as leaders in this space. There's been a lot of pronouncements about the increasingly close relationship of these two countries. Obviously, the Quad summit in September provided Prime Minister Modi an opportunity to sit down with President Biden. Secretary Kerry, Special Envoy Kerry now was in India just recently. We have the Quad summit and the Quad framework. We have the newly announced sort of quadrilateral between the UAE, Israel, India, and the United States. And as Vivek mentioned, Israel has long been a leader in innovative technologies that are climate friendly. Very long-winded question to ask you to talk a little bit about whether you are optimistic about the kind of leadership role that the United States and India can play in pushing a climate consensus, because at the same time as they say a lot of things that suggest a real partnership, India takes a very different stance in the United States on a lot of climate issues. It caucuses with a different set of countries in the context of COP. It has made very clear that it expects the historical polluters to pay their share, and that countries like India cannot reasonably commit to being, net zero by 2050, etc. So should we be concerned about that, or do you think overall this partnership is going to drive the international cooperation the world needs?
That's a great question. I think personally, I am optimistic that the partnership can really pave the way for the world to really follow through and to kickstart energy transition in other places as well. If only big blocs like India, the US, or the EU, for example, manage to de-link geopolitics and the history of geopolitics and potential tensions that come with it with climate action. That at the moment is pretty much bundled up. So if there are tensions between India and the US at any point, like political tensions on other issues, then climate action also suffers. If countries learn to de-link the two issues, then they can really go ahead. So yeah, that's my perspective. And I think in terms of COP, I think India is right. Committing to a 2050 net zero target would be silly and would be unachievable, and it will become one of these shows that you hear a lot at COP, where people, countries rather, and governments, they commit to unachievable targets. There are many countries in South Asia that are kind of doing this as well. You hear here and there a country that has 1% renewable energies in the energy basket, and they promise 60% by 2030. Like, these are unrealistic promises. So from, personally, I think it's very wise from India not to want to commit to this. But I think as long as it can demonstrate practical action from a sector perspective and from a more pragmatic perspective, that gives confidence to businesses to invest in India, and it gives confidence, I think, to foreign partners as well and foreign governments to really engage with India's vision. And the same is for the US. The US is this great leader because it can export research, it can export successes that all the world is applying in their own, to solve their own problems on the ground. So I think partnerships have to be grown this way at a practical level and subnational level sometimes, as well as international. At COP, I hope we are not going to get sucked in like big claims that then remain on paper. So that's my hope for COP. But other than that, I'm really optimistic.
I appreciate that, and I apologize for cutting you off. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Vivek, if I can turn to you, two things that Lou just mentioned struck me as an opportunity to get your perspective on. The first is sort of what are the challenges, or again, opportunities, however we want to frame this, for India in terms of attracting more capital, or put more bluntly, what are the reforms that you would advise the government to facilitate in order to make India a more attractive destination for international finance capital that's climate friendly, right? I mean, while we might all applaud the pronouncements made, there's also the reality that India is often seen as a country that's hard to do business in. What could be done that enables that'll to just happen more quickly, given the urgency of the current crisis?
Yeah, so I think, Irfan, when you look at, I'm not going to get into specific reforms, but what investors want is transparency. What investors want is, in some ways, reliability, that things will not be rolled back, that we will continue on the path once that policy is decided, it will continue on that path. What investors want is some sort of security. And most importantly, what investors want is world-class infrastructure, because these are all factors that go into the cost of doing business as such. So this is really what we need for any country if they want to continue being part of the global value chain, the global supply chains. Now, I think the huge opportunity for India is that as the West is trying to diversify supply chains, is for India to really step up and in many cases even start afresh and decarbonize industry starting yesterday. Because if you don't decarbonize industry, you're not going to be part of the global supply chain or global value chain. So that is really most important. And when you look at the amount of capital needed globally for infrastructure, where is the steel going to come from? Where is the cement going to come from? Where are all the construction materials going to come from? India has an opportunity if they start to decarbonize, people like JSW start to decarbonize, which they are doing their operations, they could actually become global suppliers in these spaces. Because today, that's really what, if I am a firm in the US or in Europe, buying something and looking for a vendor or a supplier, that's the first question I'm going to ask is, I'm committed to net zero. Are my suppliers committed to net zero? And I think that's a huge opportunity for India, because what India offers, like China, is not only a huge domestic market. So you can only have economies of scale, I would argue, in markets like India and China, because you've got a huge domestic market. And therefore, you could also then be a very, very competitive exporter. But at the same time, the risk is if India does not decarbonize, if industry in India does not look at this as an opportunity, they could also get left behind. So it's not just about policies, it's also about decarbonizing operations and setting up new operations. And I keep going back to what you really need is these huge real estate operations, which would look at industry by industry, the industrial parks, which have been very successful in many countries in East Asia. The second point I want to make, which is a huge opportunity in India, is to decarbonize real estate. So we at IFC have a tool called EDGE, which helps you, which is for emerging markets. It's very, very reasonable. Your payback periods from greening your buildings is now 2 to 3 years. After that, it's just a great business proposition because you save 30% on energy, you save on water. So that's another huge opportunity India has, is to start to green real estate. And that I think would attract a lot of capital because like I said, there's a lot of green capital waiting. A lot of large real estate firms that have capital want to invest. And the only place they can get scale other than China, I would argue, is India today in emerging markets. And to a lesser extent, Brazil and Mexico. So again, a huge opportunity for India to attract capital is greening of real estate.
The point Vivek just made really is a pretty critical one for this audience, given the makeup of it and the partnership with CII, which is that for Indian businesses, the opportunity, because by and large Indian companies have always operated closer to the green frontier, just by virtue of being earlier in their cycles, provides an opportunity to be competitive in global value chains, especially as Western companies face much greater pressure from their governments to show that they're meeting environmental and social benchmarks that are going to be expected of them. So this does not minimize the challenges that will be faced by companies to move in that direction, but the long term is climate-friendly policy, especially for companies that want to play, I think, in global supply chains. So I just really want to underscore that point Vivek made. Lou, if I may come back to you then, as we begin to wrap up over here. I want to take this really to the citizen level. One of the things when you and I first met, you were working on really talking about parts of the climate crisis that don't get all the attention over here, right? The melting of Himalayan snow caps, far-flung parts of India that are not sort of the bread and butter parts of the country, not the large economic sector of the country, but that bear the brunt of this. You also live in Delhi, a city that has unfortunately been in the news for its air pollution crisis over the last few years. Do you think that public sentiment about climate has changed in the time that you've been in India as you look at other parts of the world that you're familiar with? Do you think we're going to see pressure on businesses and on governments coming from the citizenry for our citizens, especially in a country like India, where most of the population remains middle or low income, focused on sort of bread and butter issues and unlikely to put the kind of pressure that might be needed on businesses, on governments to go green?
Right, I would say globally, I've seen the public opinion really changing. So I've been a climate journalist for many, many years now, like almost just over a decade. And initially in the first 2-3 years, everyone was asking me, what do you do? And what is it, that thing that you're reporting on? Like, there was really no interest at all. And now here we are, 2021, and COP26 is one of the most talked about events of the month, for sure, if not of the year. And a lot of people who don't necessarily work in the environment sector are also interested and taking part, and are thinking, what does this debate mean for me and for my life personally? I find in India, obviously, more people are more worried about their day-to-day, and naturally, and they see environmental issues as something that just is part of the place, right? In Delhi, for example, you see pollution as weather rather than on an environmental problem. So when there is horrible pollution in a powerful day, you will say, oh, it's bad weather. So we're still at that stage when people see that as part of their daily life. But I think things are changing as well, and more people are engaged in conversation, demanding accountability from the government, demanding things change. And I think in the coming years, the public will become also more educated and able to spot bogus solutions, like the smoke towers in Delhi. Scientists have been really calling this out, saying smoke towers don't work. Why are you keeping, pouring so much money in a smoke tower? And so far, the message hasn't really come across, and the government keeps investing in the smoke tower. But I think more and more people are fed up with these solutions, and they will become more smarter and demanding more incisive solutions to the problem. So I'm very optimistic. It might take time, but things are moving faster now, because the problem is becoming more global, and everywhere you turn, there's going to be conversation going around on how business issues and how social issues and cultural issues relate to climate change. So yeah, I think things are about to change, hopefully.
Thank you. That's a lovely note on which to end. There's an adage in politics that we should never waste a good crisis. It is often used cynically to say that governments use a crisis to push through a lot of reforms that are quite painful and that will be hard to do in normal times. Maybe here the climate crisis is a positive spin on that adage, that this is a crisis that will force us to take stock of where we are and to do the things that we've been avoiding doing, that we've been putting off doing, because the time is now, and unless we do it, it'll be too late very quickly. If we succeed in fighting the climate crisis, it will be because of the leadership of countries like the United States and of India, but more importantly of the private sectors in those countries that innovate, that push those innovations to market, to scale, in order to sort of stave off the worst effects of climate change over the next 50 years. So thank you so much to my colleagues, Ms. Lou Del Bello. Please check out her newsletter, Lights On. Mr. Prabodh Acharya, Chief Sustainability Officer at JSW Group. Mr. Vivek Pathak, Head of Climate Finance at the IFC Group. My colleagues at the US Consulate, Mr. Scott Ticknor, Ms. Amrita DeMello, colleagues at CII, Ms. Achit Shankar and Pooja Jha, and my colleague Anya Bharadwaj for her support on making this program possible. We are at the start of what will be a lot of webinars, a lot of coverage of COP26. I urge you to pay attention to all of that, but also to return on November 30th, when again with CII and the US Consulate in Bombay, I will bring together a group of experts to talk about a debrief of COP26, but really once again, a focus on the implications for Indian business. So I hope to see you back on November 30th. And until then, allow me to wish all of you a very happy Diwali season. Please be well, take care. Thank you.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you.